Hello and welcome to the Quarter of an Hour. Today we will be interviewing a knighted scientist who revolutionized the world's views on motion and light. We will also be getting to know a German mathematician who claims to have created the infinitesimal calculus. These two competing scientists have fought and argued only to end in controversy. First guest tonight from Woolsthorpe, England. He was born January 4th, 1643, during the height of the scientific revolution. Please welcome Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Newton, thank you for joining us today.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Firstly, tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I wasn't expected to survive my birth. I was a preemie as a child, and I never got to know my dad either. He died 3 months before I was born, so he was never in my life. Never got to know him.
Was it just you and your mother growing up?
Well, shortly after I was born, my mother remarried, and she sent me to go live with my grandma. And while I was with my grandma, I lived with her until I was about 12, and then my mother came back in the picture.
That would leave you insecure, but you did, after all, influence the world with your theories. So let's talk about after you reunited with your mother. What was life like back with your mother in the picture?
First, it was tough. My mother abandoned me for 12 years. I was just living with my grandma. It was just me and her. When she returned, she pulled me out of school to start working on the farm. I failed miserably. I'm not a farmer by any means. So my uncle, who had seen me in school and noticed that I had a knack for learning, he urged my mother to try to send me to Cambridge.
Did you end up going to Cambridge, and what was your experience there?
I did, in fact, end up going to Cambridge. The institution actually taught Aristotelian concepts, which were qualitative and not quantitative. What I mean by quantitative is that you'd be able to measure, you could explain everything through math.
What did you do at Cambridge?
Because I did not agree with the Aristotelian views, I did not graduate with honors, though they did recognize me as a scholar.
In 1665, the Great Plague of London killed over 15% of the population and closed down Cambridge. During this epidemic, what did you focus your time and research on?
I actually started observing elliptical paths of the planets. I wanted to find a way to formulate and to describe their movement. And this also led to my discovery of infinitesimal calculus.
You didn't just create calculus now, did you?
No, I also focused on light and color. I found that light can be refracted through a prism into a rainbow. And you can take that rainbow and refract it back into the original light.
After the plague subsided and Cambridge reopened, what was your next step?
Well, by the time I had turned 27, I had already finished my studies and got my Master's of Arts degree. I then started teaching at Cambridge. When I taught there, I gave lectures on optics, and I used a telescope that I invented. It was the reflecting telescope. It used a mirror to focus light into images. I presented that to the Royal Society in 1671, and they greatly appreciated my work, and they were impressed by what I did. So I published my notes, Newton's Optics, a treatise of the reflections, refractions, inflections, and colors of light in 1672.
Did everyone accept your theories on light and color?
No, Robert Hale, an established member of the Royal Society, he was opposed to my ideas. I know that white light consists of all the colors, and that all colors consist of particles. Hale thought that light was consistent of waves. I know I'm right, though. No one can tell me otherwise.
Now, this is a bold statement to claim you are right, and can come off as arrogant.
Well, the time I put into my research and all the hours I put in, how could I be wrong?
This may come off as a touchy subject, and I can tell you particularly don't take criticism well. Do you mind if I ask if this is what led to your mental breakdown in 1678?
I wasn't having a mental breakdown. I just had a lot of stress from being introduced to the Royal Society and publishing new work. My mother had also just died.
Break you took. You still worked on theories and concepts, though, but what was it you discovered?
Well, on my hiatus, I received a letter from Robert Hooke asking if I was capable of calculating and formulating how ellipses move. I ended up using the inverse square to calculate an ellipse.
Didn't Hooke suggest using the inverse square, or did you discover it on your own? Sources tell me that Hooke theorized that the inverse square would describe ellipses.
No. Hooke just suggested that. I had already come up with that, the inverse square, back in 1665 when I was on break during the plague. I just happened to have lost my notes. I can't find them, but I can prove I know how to do the math. But I assure you, it was me who discovered that.
Principia, your publication of this was revolutionary.
Yes, Principia, my most influential work. In my work, I address the theories of gravity, motion, and forces throughout the universe. Of course, Robert Hooke tried to accuse me of plagiarism, still claiming he came up with the square inverse for calculating the elliptical movement of the planets.
Cambridge, you stuck around there for a while. In fact, you were elected to represent them when the Catholic Church tried to change the teaching.
Well, in 1689, it is true the Church tried to use its influence, as well as King James II, to pressure educational institutions to teach sciences the way the Catholic Church deemed necessary. I was elected to represent Cambridge at Parliament in order to resist the efforts of the Church to change it.
1693, you disappeared again. Can you tell me what happened?
I just needed a vacation. I needed another break. I'd been doing a lot of work for the past few years, but it wasn't a breakdown. I can assure you that. Some of my friends and colleagues may not agree with me on that. Some of them did write letters of concern, asking if maybe I had mercury poisoning, or that I was just upset for not getting appointed to a higher position at the Royal Society. I really just needed time to reflect and focus on my own research.
You started focusing on prophecy, scripture, and alchemy after your break. What was the motivation to change your focus?
Well, during the time, there was much political and scientific unrest, a lot of competing theories and ideas. Most intellectuals at the time were focusing more on these subjects. They were trying to improve our politics and our scientific community.
By this time, you started becoming a very well-known political and scientific figure. What was your political life like?
Well, I started my political career at the Royal Society, but my big break when I was appointed the Warden of the Mint in 1696. In 3 years, I was promoted to Master of the Mint, and at that time, I took the British currency off of the silver pound and put it onto the gold standard. I was also promoted to the President of the Royal Society, and in 1705, I even got knighted by Queen Anne.
You were knighted in 1705. You were haunted by more controversy. Gottfried Leibniz publicly accused you of plagiarism. He claims he discovered and is the creator of infinitesimal calculus.
Well, let me tell you something, Joseph. Whatever you've heard from Gottfried is a lie. He may have worked on infinitesimal calculus during around the same time I was doing it, but it was me who discovered it, actually a few years before he did.
And what happened next?
Well, the Royal Society decided to put together an investigation to find out who really did discover infinitesimal calculus. Well, there was a team of members. They were appointed to do as much research as they can and track back and see who actually came up with it. They ruled in my favor, cementing me as the creator of calculus.
But you were the president of the Royal Society at the time, so who appointed the investigators?
I did.
From one controversy to another, you were faced yet again with a quarrel between John Flamsteed. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, John Flamsteed, he was an astronomer, and I was using his notes to expand my theories on motion. Well, he was becoming reluctant to share his work, and he was even taking time to send me his notes. So there'd be long gaps in my research, just waiting. I got a little annoyed by this. But it's alright, I was appointed the chairman of the body of visitors responsible for the Royal Observatory. That gave me full access to all the notes there, including John Flamsteed's.
So you made yourself his boss to access his work, but you did more than that when you had his arch rival Edmund Halley prepare, print, and publish Flamsteed's notes. Well, that is all the time we have. You made an illustrious career and made a lot of contributions. We would like to thank you for that and for being on our show.
Well, thank you, Joseph. It's great meeting you.
Our next guest originates from Leipzig, Germany. Please welcome Gottfried Leibniz. Thanks for joining. What was your childhood like, and what influenced you as you grew up?
Well, Chris, when I was a child, I grew up in a Christian home. My father passed when I was only 6 years old, so my mother was a large influence in my life,
Did you have access to education as a child in Leipzig?
Well, as far as education goes, when I was a child, I studied at the Nikolai School in Leipzig, where I was taught Latin. On my free time, though, I studied Greek, and I was able to become proficient in both languages by the time I was 12 years old. Missing my father, I spent countless hours studying books from his library. They focused on the theology and metaphysics, which explained my formal education on the Aristotelian point of view.
So after your primary education, what did you pursue next?
Well, in 1661, I enrolled at the University of Leipzig. I was 14 at the time. During this time, I studied philosophy, mathematics, rhetoric, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. I attained my bachelor's degree after writing my thesis on principle of individual in 1663. This thesis was also where I introduced my theories on the university's interactions. Now, what made these differences is that I believe there is only God, or monads, which are spirits, non-composite, and immaterial. Pretty much everything had harmony and interaction predetermined by God, and it was created by Him. I was even able to address philosophical questions such as why is there evil, and how is there free will if everything is predetermined by God. I was able to address those questions. So
you sought to grow your knowledge, so you chose to keep learning. What was your next step in your education and research?
Chris, my next step was to receive my bachelor's degree. I received my bachelor's degree. I quickly received my master's in philosophy. I was awarded my degree after writing a dissertation that combined law and philosophy, and also explained the relations between two things using mathematical ideas.
Around the time you were awarded your master's, your mother had passed away. This must have been hard on you. How did you deal with it?
Oh, my mother. Well, my mother was dear to me and greatly influenced who I have become today. She supported me as a child and was my motivation to learn. When she passed, it took a little time for me to continue my education. You know, I knew she would have wanted me to, and I knew it would honor her if I did. So that being said, it was not an easy time. After her death, I sought to obtain my doctorate by publishing and submitting my dissertation on the combinatorial art. This paper explained my theory, and everything in the universe could be broken down into simple forms of numbers, letters, sounds, and colors. Everything we see, all reasoning and all discovery could be explained through my theory. My paper was insufficient, and I failed in receiving my doctorate degree for that particular paper. So,
I'm sorry about your mother, but I'm glad to see she is still your inspiration. You didn't give up after that, though you immediately rebounded. What was your next step?
Well, Chris, I want to thank you. I felt that the university I was at did not appreciate my work and theories, so I transferred to the university at Altdorf. At Altdorf, I was awarded my doctorate in law within a year of being denied at the University of Leipzig. To get my doctorate at Altdorf, I submitted my dissertation on perplexing cases.
So this is when your career really started to take off. Tell us about the employment opportunity that you had.
Well, I first started as secretary of the Nuremberg Alchemical Society. It was there I had met my future employer and friend, Baron Johann Christian von Boinberg. In 1667, Boinberg had employed me and I had moved to Frankfurt.
And then what did you do for Boinberg?
Well, I worked on a lot of projects. Most of them were focused on science, politics, and literacy. This helped me focus on addressing the thoughts of possible peace between the Holy Roman Empire and its surrounding kingdoms, specifically that of King Louis XIV. I wanted to create peace through new Christian theology. The Protestants and the Catholics were constantly fighting, and if the quarrel could be settled, the peace could ensue.
What actions did you take to try and persuade the two groups?
Well, I wrote many monographs explaining simple ideas in theology. They were not incredibly successful, though. During that time, I was also focused on furthering my law career.
So what did you do to further that career?
Well, to further my law career, I took up residence at the courts of Mainz. This was 1667 to 1672. There, I worked on the Roman civil law, studying everything I could about it. I saw it as another step to collate and compare all human knowledge, which has been a lifelong goal of mine.
You did more than study law, you were also expanding on your theories. In 1671, you published the new physical hypothesis. What was this new physical hypothesis?
Well, Chris, simply put, I was explaining that motion was a direct cause of spirit interaction. I shared this with the Royal Society and even dedicated some of my works to the Royal Society.
You like to take on monumental tasks, one of
Yeah.
which was addressing the violence between Protestant and Catholic groups.
Right.
You were even appointed by Boinberg to attempt to divert France from attacking Germany.
Yeah, well, Chris, Boinberg sent me to Paris to try and persuade France to push the Turks out of Egypt, I guess so that they wouldn't attack Germany. You know, it didn't work. But I actually remained in Paris for 4 years. That's where I met a number of natural philosophers.
Who were these philosophers?
Well, I met Huygens, Malebranche, and Arnauld. Huygens shared his ideas of color and light, which were contradictory to Newton's theories, much like mine as well. I also shared my research and theories with Arnauld, who I explained my theories on metaphysics.
So then why did you leave Paris?
Well, I was offered the position of librarian and court counselor by the invitation of the Duke of Hanover in 1676. I took this opportunity to explore and travel, where I was able to observe mountains and different geological formations. From what I had observed from the caves and mountain ranges, that the Earth was originally molten. But towards the end of my travels, I began to focus on my own research.
You then started to publish many pieces of work in the early 1700s. What would you say the purposes of these books were?
Well, Chris, you know, I had finally taken time to myself to focus on my research and to organize it. In releasing my work, I was able to explain my theory on human knowledge. I also released a lot of my work on monadology, an idea opposing that of Newton's. I believe that spirits control the movement and that monads are not material. The easiest way for me to explain it is to compare monads to potential energy as we think of it nowadays.
Interesting. In 1705, there was some controversy brewing. Newton claimed to have created the infinitesimal calculus.
No. Let me tell you, Chris, that liar rigged his own investigation in his favor. I had been using my calculus and even shared it with other mathematicians to use on their work. The only way to address this issue is to call it out publicly. He claims to have created calculus, but conveniently was in charge of his own investigation. You know, either way, I know I came up with calculus, and my friends and colleagues will back me up.
Your time and your contribution.
Sure, Chris, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.